Welcome to P449. It's worth it. I'm Tim Janisewski, Director of Spotlight Good News Ministries, and we are very glad to have you in this third in our series. And of course, the subject we're tackling is how to live worth it lives. Worth it lives for ourselves, worth it lives for other people in our sphere of influence, and worth it lives ultimately and above all to the glory of God. We began with Philippians 1:27, where Paul tells us that we are to live lives that are worthy of our citizenship in the city of God as the very people of God, and we should hunger and delight to do so. And he adds in that verse, we have come to this great sense of being citizens of God's kingdom through nothing less than the gospel of Jesus Christ. God's great motive, he loved us. God's great message, he gave Jesus for us. Our great response, we believe and we believe and we keep on believing, that leads to the great result. We do not perish, but we have everlasting life. In our last session, we looked at how we live worth it lives for the glory of God. We rejoice in the Lord always. We worship the Lord. We show forth his worth it-ship, if you will. Having looked at how we live with worth for the glory of God, in this session, we now turn to how do we live worth it lives for other people, for people that we love, people that we care about, people we don't even know, people to whom we may be responsible, because we should be motivated to want to live worth it lives not only to God, but to people who are made in the image of God, other human beings. Before we dive into that, let's first talk about the two polar ways in which oftentimes people relate to other people. You know, some people are what we might call people insensitive. They're just not sensitive to the effect and the impact that they're having on other people. Some people are insensitive in that they are oblivious. They simply do not know what kind of effect they're having on others. This is the proverbial person who's the bull in the china shop, just not knowing the damage they're doing, but on the other hand, maybe the good that they're doing. But some other people are people insensitive because they don't care. They don't care what others think. This is who I am, take me or leave me. Now, at the extreme opposite end of that are people who are people oversensitive. They care very much about what others think of them. In fact, they may modify how they present themselves in order to curry the favor of others. These are classic people pleasers. So, let's stop and ask ourselves at the beginning of this session, do we tend to be one or the other? Do we tend to be people insensitive or people oversensitive? Do we tend to be oblivious or not caring what other people think of us? Or are we really honestly people pleasers? Well, this session is all about finding another way through to relate to other people, a better way, because the gospel doesn't want us to be people insensitive. No, he wants us to live in a way that is appropriately sensitive. He doesn't want us to be people oversensitive, but he wants us to be, again, sensitive in a way that will be worth it to others. And so the Apostle Paul writes in the book of Philippians, chapter 4, verse 5, let your epiekes be made known to others. Yes, I just dropped a Greek word in there. I did not give you the English translation of the word epiekes. Why did I do that? Well, that's really what this particular third in our series is all about. What is epiekes? And how do we actually live in a way that makes known epiekes through our lives to others that we might be worth it for them? And we're going to approach this by looking at a tale of the 5 leading versions in sales among Bibles in the United States of America in 2021. How does each one of the 5 leading sales in Bibles in our country translate epiekes? And I'm going to throw in a 6th one that's not part of that top 5 just because it's very influential as well. So number 1, top seller is the New International Version, and it translates, let your gentleness be made known to all people. Epi case, gentleness. Number 2 is the New Living Translation, which has been shooting up the charts in the last half dozen years. It says, let your consideration, or let it be known to others that you are considerate. Considerate and consideration is epi case. Number 3 is the English Standard Version, says, let your reasonableness be made known to others. Number 4, the Venerable King James Version, first printed in 1611. It says, let your moderation be made known to all people. And coming in, breaking the top 5 for the first time, the Christian Standard Version says, let your graciousness be made known to all people. And to throw in one extra, the RSV, the Revised Standard Version, which from 1950 to about the year 2000 was the second or third leading translation in sales. Number 1 would have been the King James Version, and then number 2 behind it, the Revised Standard Version, with the NIV gaining ground. Well, because it's so influential, I add it in as well, because it gives yet another word. Let your forbearance be made known to all people. 6 leading translations, 6 influential translations in English of this particular passage, this Greek word, and we get 6 different words. What's going on here? Is it the case that our translators just are fumbling about and can't figure it out? No, I don't think so. These were the best and most capable translators in the world in terms of translating into English who do these versions. No, rather it's the case that epi case is really difficult to translate with one single English word. So instead of trying to do so, we're going to describe what epi case means. We're going to paint a portrait of epi case and what it means for us to let our epi case be made known to others so that we can be worth it for their lives. So let's begin with the NIV, gentleness. Many of us are perhaps put off by gentleness. We're not gentle people. We might not even want to be gentle people. But there's value to gentleness. I think of this back from years ago when we were raising our 4 children. They'd get into squabbles, bickering, disagreeing with one another. And how many times did my wife say to our children in those situations? Proverbs 15:1. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. So let us ask ourselves, when there are those difficulties or disagreements, are we the ones to give the gentle word that turns away wrath, that turns down the temperature in the debate? Or are we the ones who give the harsh word, stirring up anger, turning up the thermostat, the temperature? You know, we are called to be those who give the gentle answer. I can think of a friend of mine who was in a conversation, argument with his mother, and she was very heated and upset with him. And instead of returning with a harsh word, he simply said, "Mom, I love you. I know this is hard for you, and I think we can work it out." And immediately she toned down, came off the emotional ledge, and they had a constructive conversation. That's where gentleness is so valuable for us in letting our epi case be made known to others. Well, let's move on to, secondly, the New Living Translation, our considerateness. You know, have you been in conversations with people who simply don't listen to you? You know they're not listening to you. Their minds are miles away. That's inconsiderate. Or in conversations with people who appear to be listening to you, but you can tell they are just really calculating what they're going to say next. That too is inconsiderate and it's demeaning. Nobody likes that. But rather, Paul says, let your considerateness be made known to others. Learn to listen. As I used to say to my kids again, listening is an acquired skill. And we as Christians, if we would have epi case that is worth it for other people, we learn to listen. Whether we agree or disagree, people will know that they have been heard after they have spoken and engaged with us. That too is epi case. Moving on to number 3, the ESV, reasonableness. We are to be the people who are voices of reason in a shrill world. There is so much in our society today that that is bombastic. It stirs the pot. It polarizes people on one end or the other end. It goes for the emotional jugular vein. Paul says, no, don't buy into that. In fact, be the opposite of that. Look at other people and say, let's reason this out. Let's think it through before we make a decision. We're to be the people who echo the words of God himself from the book of Isaiah. Come, let us reason together. That's what the Lord says. And we need to be the people who say, Epie case, come, let us reason together. Moving to the fourth of these words, it is from the King James Version, moderation. Moderation comes from sophrosune, which was a high value in the Roman world at that time. And it meant that people of excellence were to engage with other people with a sense of balance. They were to look for a place of developing common ground with other people. They were to moderate, if you will. If you've ever moderated a meeting, you know it's your job to bring to light what everybody is saying, help people to engage in a way that moderates the conversation with the ultimate goal, that the best resolution and the best answer will come. So Paul says, let your sense of balance, your sense of perspective, your sense that looks for the common ground be made known to all people. And then fifth, the Christian Standard Version, graciousness. Do we relate to people, first and foremost, with grace? Grace is that sense of wanting the best for people and hoping for the best from people. Grace is that sense that assumes that people are innocent until they're proven guilty, instead of requiring people to prove they're innocent because we assume they're guilty. People, indeed, who are gracious, give people the benefit of the doubt. You know, theologically, grace is God's unmerited favor. He has given us his unmerited favor by bringing us the gospel that makes us citizens of his kingdom. That's unmerited favor. Let us extend that unmerited favor to other people if we would be worth it people in their lives. And finally, as we round out this portrait, forbearance in the RSV. That's just patience. It's perseverance. It's tenacity in staying with people when it would be easier to walk away from people. It's that sense of being willing to sacrifice for another person and setting aside our own personal interests. As Paul wrote in Philippians 2:4, let each one of you look not only to your own interests, but to the interests of others. That's forbearance. What a rich word, epiekes. Who would have thought all that is wrapped up into that one Greek word? To review, it's gentleness that turns away wrath. It's consideration that truly values the other person and what they say. It's reasonableness that rises above the shrill. It is moderation that looks for balance. It is graciousness that would extend unmerited favor, and it is forbearance that goes the distance. Well, having indeed looked at this portrait of epiekes, let's look at an example. And Paul gives us one actually in verses 2 and 3 of chapter 4. Amazingly, he shows us and displays for us epiekes. So happens that there were two women in the church at Philippi. No doubt they were leaders named Euodia and Syntyche. And we know this because Paul mentions them in the leader. Everybody knew Euodia and Syntyche, and everybody knew that they were having a Donnybrook. These two ladies were not getting along. It was impacting the church, and something needed to be done. And Paul feels he has to intervene and say something about this disagreement. So let's listen for how he poses his comments with epiekes. First of all, he says, I entreat you, Euodia, and you, Syntyche, I entreat both of you equally to listen to what I'm about to say. They're on equal ground in the way he addresses them. Not one or the other, but both of them are called to listen. But he calls them to listen in the Lord. He says, I want you to agree, but your agreement needs to be in the Lord. Euodia, put down your agenda. Syntyche, leave your agenda behind. Let's look for the agenda of Jesus, and that's the way you ladies are going to find a way through to a resolution. And Paul then realizes that if these two ladies have not worked it out by this time, they're going to need some help. And so he addresses a leading member of the congregation and says, true companion, help these ladies, moderate, let your moderation intercede with them to help them find common ground. Help them to reason through the situation, good friend. But then Paul even goes on to praise these women. He doesn't vilify them or condemn them or belittle them. He says, no, you ladies were fellow workers with Clement and our other fellow workers when we got the gospel out in Philippi, and your names are written in the book of life. Do you hear the epia case in the way that Paul is addressing this situation? He's being gentle and considerate, reasonable, moderate, gracious, and patient. And Paul is saying that whenever possible, let this be the way that we approach and relate to others. Let our epia case be made known to everyone. Now, we finally wrap this up, I think, with a passage that captures the framework for epia case. Paul would later write in the book of Romans, chapter 11, and Romans chapter 12, verse 18. If possible, so far as depends on you, live at peace with everyone. If possible, so far as depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be the sons of God. We are to be those who broker peace in our relationships with others if we would be a blessing to them, if we would be worth it to them as people walking through this world. And Paul says the way that we approach people so that we might be at peace with them and bring peace to them is to let our epia case be made known to them in each and every conversation, at every opportunity. We're not, on one hand, to be people insensitive, bulls in the china shop, or just not caring. No, we're not to be people oversensitive, people pleasers. Instead, Paul gives us the third way through. It is epia case. We are to live with gentleness towards them. We are to make known to them as well as that our consideration. To our consideration, we are to add our moderation. With our moderation, we add reasonableness. To our reasonableness, we add graciousness. And to graciousness, we add forbearance. That is the way in which we live worth it lives for other people. So having looked at living worth it lives to the glory of God, rejoice in the Lord always, and towards other people, let our epia case be known to others. What about worth it lives for ourselves as we seek to be fully devoted followers of Jesus? What might Paul have to say to us to improve the quality of our own personal daily experience and walk of faith? That's the subject to which we will turn in our next program. So we hope you will join that with us. And thanks so much. We'll talk to you next time.